Дорогие друзья, коллеги,
Dear friends and colleagues, I would suggest to start this roundtable. My name is Dmitry Gorshkov, Director WWF Russia, and I'm going to moderate this roundtable discussion, which is titled Preserving Biodiversity as the Priority Goal for the Sustainable Development of the Tourism Industry. And I would like to change this name a little bit and would put a question mark at the end of it. And during this roundtable discussion, we'll think about whether preserving the biodiversity is the main or one of the priority goals of the tourism development at the specially protected territories. And I would like to get the feedback from the speakers, whether it was a positive, negative experience we have gained both in Russia and the world, and whether the biodiversity was assisted or, this process was failed, wasn't successful. And you can vote, the question that we put for voting is that should the tourism at the special protected natural territories, should it have the natural protection effect? Yeah, one, yes, for sure. Second of all, yes, but it's not the main one. And third option, no, it doesn't have to. And please check our website and vote. And we're going to get to this voting at the end of this discussion. And throughout the discussions of yesterday and after all these meetings, we tend to measure the success in rubles, in the number of visits, in the length of the paths and trails, and number of buildings that have been built. Whether it's a true parameter, it's a reasonable parameter, or do you think that there should be other ways to measure success? And I would like to discuss these things with speakers, and I would like to introduce these speakers by the order which they're going to be given floor. So the first speaker is Mikhail Yablokov, an expert on territorial preservation of nature. So Mikhail has huge experience of being the director of one of the special protected areas. And next speaker, who is going to be online, Pyotr Shpelinok, director of Koronotsky Reserve. Yes, can you hear us well? Most probably yes. And then I would like to say that here we have at the podium the highest density of Dmitries, not only in Krasnaya Polyana, but in Krasnoy region. So we have three Dmitries on the stage here. Dmitry Kolosov, director on the nature preservation and sustainable development of Rosa Hutor, and Dmitry Hamaza, general director of Eco Monitoring. I think that we're going to build our presentations or like this way. So the speakers have a chance to speak, and let's say 10 to 12 minutes maximum, without any questions from the audience. And then after all the presentations, there will be a Q&A, and those who are watching us online, so we welcome your questions in the chat. And I think that we're going to jump right to the presentations. Most of us have heard about some of the successful examples of the preservation of, let's say in Rwanda, the gorillas were saved thanks to the tourism, and they were able to preserve the species. And do have similar approaches in Russia. Are these projects going to work in Russia, and how? What are the chances to have these programs of biodiversity and preservation while developing tourism? Mikhail. Colleagues, good afternoon. So I have not an easy task, simply because due to the constraints of time, and because I'm more of a hands-on guy and practical approach, but I have to venture out into the theoretical aspect of things, and to have a broader outlook on tourism as a tool of the preservation of nature. And much has been said about and in different presentations about the use of term of ecotourism. It was like a mix of understanding, and with our colleagues we've been discussing it, that quite often we speak about ecotourism, natural tourism, and explorative tourism, and then recreation in general. So all of these facets are labeled ecotourism, and quite often we have a lot of multiple eco things, and but still the eco, actually this eco thing, if we look it up, so it would mean that it could be identified what tourism is and what tourism isn't. So do we have a clicker, please? So first of all, I would like to say that a couple of words about the relationships to tourism, and by working at the National Nature Protected Area, and I continue my, let's say, I still work with my colleagues, and the most quite pervasive, let's say, definition of tourism is a threat to nature, for example, and developing tourism in nature. We should strike a compromise. So some of the natural resources we give as as a toll, but still we need to develop. So this is like a trade. And this, in fairly speaking, this is the wrong approach. And because tourism, as I have said, can be perceived as the tool to preserve nature. And that was my main goal to talk on my presentation. So what is ecotourism? In my view, yesterday and today, some people gave correct definitions of what it is: ecological awareness, enlightenment, and educational aspects of all these things. And I looked up some of the definitions and applied my personal view on that. So at that, I offer you a more generalized view of what ecological tourism is. So, of course, this is the natural tourism, this venturing out into the nature, and tourism has four basic components. If we assess the products by the criteria, so four criteria, and which make ecotourism. So first of all, going into nature and communing with nature, because if you visit a plant, it's different. And then about the relationship to, so how it impacts the nature, and the impact should be controlled and minimum. So what does minimum mean? So there should be rules in place that regulate the impact on the nature. So we build the relative infrastructure that provides for the minimum impact, protecting and helping us keep it safe, and controlled, meaning we need to monitor anthropogenic load in terms of the special protected territories. We have some specialists. But still, what we do and regulate all of these activities, and all these activities do not bring to the detrimental effects on this territory. And also another effect is and this is my personal view, so sometimes we speak about different facets of it. If we preserve nature, if you look different definitions, different organizations, including the worldwide organizations, then there will be accent, and one component will be highlighted. But ecotourism and the preservation effect is that having a human involvement is better if there is no human involvement. And so last component, integration into local economies, creating conditions that when the local people want to preserve what they have, when the locals are involved, they participate in these activities, and they become the people who support this particular programs, and this could be relegated to the third block, but simply this is what we call sustainable tourism. Without local communities, without involving local communities, be it the special restricted areas, we cannot get to the threshold of being sustainable. And some more information about natural preservation effect. There are 8 of them that I highlighted. So of course this is not the final list of things, and still this is just a theory that is being built. And when we at a particular territory, when we have a concentration of let's say some of the species of plants and trees, and this is a resource, and those people who manage the territories, of course, they want to observe, and of course you need to protect against the poachers, and there will be some inspectors, and tourists are also out there. So we have the degradation of complexes and negative impacts and effects that we are used to fighting against, and we have some units that protect us, and of course they need to control large territories. They need to have some tools, and when we develop tourism, we need to prevent poaching with the help of tourists, because tourists are there not to shoot, but we of course need to use and utilize the proceeds from the tourist flows to channel these resources to develop ourselves. So speaking about the finances, and to talk a little bit about some economy of things. So this is true for the special protected areas and territories, because I think that for now I cannot say that there are some great examples of profitable projects. They say that you still invest more for, let's say, ecological tourism at special restricted natural territories. Of course, you spend more money, but still a little bit of that flow of income that you're able to generate, you can bring back and use towards some ecological projects, and this out of the budget thing. So we have the budgets provided by the state, and we have some extra budget resources. So to have them as more as possible is important. And of course, the effect to preserve nature, we've been discussing that quite often, and I liked some of the discussions yesterday about the enlightenment, awareness, and the different assets, and the plenary session also touched upon these things. And when we speak about, let's say, when we speak to the large numbers of people, this is not only enlightenment, but of course, you may use this term or awareness or other things. So people, we need to shape up their view on things, and by working with them, we build a support, and we here can talk about the local business. And it's great that if business is a local business, and because it's economically important to preserve the nature, because the nature attracts tourism, but not the services. And of course, if you travel out somewhere for natural resources and to special areas, of course you like to enjoy the landscapes. And second of all is where you're going to stay, use transport or to stay in a hotel. Of course, these things are necessary, but not at the top of the list. And of course, by doing that, we shape up the sustainability. And I think that Piotr, as the director of the reserve at Kamchatka, so how can they become partners? Yeah, let's say if there is a threat or some hazard. And I highlighted in a different color is the social effect. And of course, these effects are important, but they are enacted through communication with the locals. And I was able to work with some of the reserves, and for 3 years I've been working with some as a consultant to many of the territories in Russia, and we've been able to get into that. And so very briefly, if we have some natural resources, or we can, let's say, extract these resources and sell it in the market. We cut trees, we sell, sell the logs, and we need just to wait for like 50 or 100 years for this, for these trees to grow up again. But we can have resources, excursions around this forest, and we change, let's say, the resource mode of operation. And we, let's say, do something different because there are rare species of, let's say, and of animals, and therefore we can be proud by preserving these, changing the model, and because we change the social norms, and this is the different view of the local people towards those bans and limitations that these territories might have. So here we have a wealth of problems and challenges because the locals do not support these activities. Wherever they live, it has always been a resource for them, and they get used to using those, and one day some kind of a structure arises and tells them that no, you can't do that any longer. So if we involve people, locals, of course, they get something to do, and I think that they can be involved not by being against all these programs, but they can be part of these programs, and this is the guarantee that we can make. And social norms, I think that these people who change their minds, change their views, they support us, and we have some good examples of that. And building jobs, and I think that it's quite self-apparent, and building new jobs, and for example, people are involved into, the process of, let's say, if a person has a good job, then he might not think about changing this job, and but still sometimes people need just to get into the forest because they need to because they just need to eat, and so that's why, of course, it's very important to build jobs, and so that people can make some money. And this tourism flow, by building it, so we attract to these settlements where local people live. So we attract tourists who are quite often wealthy people. They are well-rounded and fully fledged, and I think that little by little, the local people start paying attention to these things. Of course, initially, the locals may laugh at these some loony-looking, people who do not throw bottles and pick up other plastic bottles that have been left. But locals also change this perception, and they start, so they say just okay. So it's not just a forest with some couple of bushes, but they start to appreciate and enjoy what they have, and treat it with honor, and they also want to be part of this culture that tourists from outside bring. So that's briefly what I wanted to say, and for the further up, probably there will be further questions. Thank you very much. Yes, Mikhail, thank you. So presentation was, of course, quite a theoretical one, but I'm sure that you have quite a lot of examples, both positive and negative, as I mentioned in the intro. And as far as I understand, that your work is more of a sociology, and in the area of preserving nature. Yes, there are some good examples, and I've been speaking at length. So yes, we're going to so that you would know how much time you have. So we have the timer up on the screen here, but let's jump into the future. So Kamchatka is almost tomorrow already. So Piotr Shpelinok, and I would like to give him the floor, and so that he can share the experience of tourism in Kamchatka, some of the threats that both in Kamchatka and tourism can pose to natural habitats. So how can we avoid these things?
Hello, can you hear me? Excellent. And my presentation, and you can see me. Hello, dear friends. It is night time here, so please no offense if I make a mistake somewhere. Millions of people across the world know about Kamchatka, and there's the Kurilskaya Lake there. And it is one of the most vibrant places in Kamchatka. But it's been not like that before, and many people now dream about getting there. But the point is that in 2000, very few people knew about it, even in Kamchatka, but it was associated mostly with poaching. In 2007, only 200 tourists visited this place, and it was about large-scale poaching, about salmon, caviar, and it was like 500 kilos per night that poachers could make, and there were a lot of poachers there, and they were shooting bears to export them for the traditional Chinese medicine, and the local population was participating in it. And it was really complicated, and no one wanted anyone there in the eyes to see it, so tourists were not needed there. So that's why there were very few. And tourism, well, in our country for many years, no one cared about tourism. For all my life, I've been living in this system of reserves, and I very much respect the people like Vladimir Bareiko and Felix Albertovich Tilbeck, so who did a lot for the reserves. But from the practice that I saw, and I've been to many territories, and I saw what was going on there, always somewhere in some places, even very protected, there are people who violate this regime, and hidden poaching was a very big problem, and still is to some extent. We all remember such sad periods when reserves were closed down, and Kronotsky Reserve, it happened twice to it, and the saddest thing, it was the damage that was done during this time. And of course, reserves, they do not need complete prohibition of everything, but they need the support of the locals. This cannot be shaped from the pictures, but you can also take people there, show them around. We fought the poaching very hard, and we have a film on that, which is going to be ready quite soon. And poachers approached us in a certain period of time, and they actually thanked us that they started doing agriculture or tourism, and they say that now it's impossible to poach because either tourists or your inspectors will notice it and report it. But it's a long way. And in this slide you see the process. So it was 200 and 800 tourists, and in 2019 we had 6,000 tourists. So it was a long way. We did not have enough experience back then. We didn't know what to emphasize, what to prioritize. So we created the regulations to make our interaction with the tourist companies as transparent as possible. We invested a lot into training our employees, and I'm proud to say that we developed the programs in a really professional way. So in general, we are monitoring and watching how tourism has impact on the trails, but not only the trails, of course, but its impact on the wildlife, like bears. We carry out this research. So we take that into account throughout the time, and we make certain adjustments. In 2018, we reduced number of groups because we understood that we need to do something with the multi-day groups. Not everything works the way we wanted it to, because unfortunately during this period, for technical reason, weather reason, we have certain difficulties. And this cannot be called a good example of environmental tourism. There are things that worry us, because for one-day groups, we really cannot provide the submerging, so we do not really have enough time to change the attitude of these people to nature. And here the important component is that we have the tourist flows by now, but we recognize our problems and we work on them, but we are not quite efficient with working with the local population, local tourist companies, because tourism there is mostly on helicopters. People just fly in and fly out. And our today's goal is to involve the local population into the economy of the reserve. So it's fishermen villages mostly. So our task is to redirect the tourist flows from the lake to the villages, so that the people who were poachers back then, and then they kind of lost their jobs, and we want them to have the possibility to earn and take care of their resources that allow them earning money. Tourist season should be extended, of course, and it's an important task. Also, we have the garbage problem in those villages, and everything like this made us participate in the All Russia contest for the natural clusters, and we won, and we became the top 10 projects. So we want to build up a new model, improve the stability of the environmental system. So how many bears we have, it greatly depends on the number of fishes in the river. And we want it to be a federal project, and people will be joining us and provide help. For us, it is important that Kamchatka is being explored and developed, and there are more than 50 investment projects there, and they plan to construct an airport, and this will give us 3 million visitors per year in our region. So we need the right model where the business and the local population is integrated. So the example of Rosa Hutor, Rosa Hutor is going to work in Kamchatka as well, and in the last conference we were discussing it already, and it's a bit frightening for the residents of Kamchatka to participate in this kind of project. Now it's become clearer, but in general, we would like to make a model territory which could be upscaled throughout the whole region of Kamchatka. And also would like to mention tourist operators working there, because for the moment, people who started working back then, they were the ideologists of environmental tourism to the protected areas, and they position themselves not just as people who bring the tourists in, but the tourists coming there, they want to know that by coming there, they help to preserve this area. And it's important to keep that in mind, and we need to have people like that all across the country. So we do not want those arguments if we let the people in or not. So we want to let these people in, but we want those people to appreciate it, really. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Piotr, for your input and for keeping the track of time. That's a very interesting approach, and of course we will get back to the example of Kamchatka. But now I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Khomaza. Thank you very much for agreeing to participate in the session, or Dmitry Kolosov. It's clear that when a conference is taking place in Rosa Khutor, of course, everyone is eager to know what's being done here for preserving the biodiversity, for reducing the impact of the resort on the biodiversity. And now Piotr told us that they are going to develop, that Rosa Khutor is going to develop the resorts not only in Sochi, but also in other regions, including Kamchatka. So what lessons were learned here in the Caucasus? So please, you have the floor. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity. I was very happy. When we were getting prepared to the conference, I was very excited by Dmitry's offer to make a presentation in his session. And as you know, in this context, it's kind of challenge. And it's very flattering for me that I was chosen to make the presentation in your session. I will try to keep it brief. As for the protection of environment, well, I'm not the specialist for the nature protection, but I am in charge of sustainable development of the best ski resort in Russia, and I'm going to tell you about this resort and the challenges we have and what priorities are guiding us. So Rosa Khutor is the leader of the tourist industry of Russia. It is the largest and the best all the year-round resort. It was built during the preparation to the Winter Olympic Games in Sochi, and very soon we are going to celebrate the 10th anniversary. We have the longest ski tracks with the largest in Europe system of artificial snowing. So, and the tourist traffic is all the year round, and it approaches 2 million, and in summer we have more visitors than in winter. We are located in the region that is called the Black Sea Caucasus, from 560 to almost 2,600 meters above sea level. The Aibga Ridge. If we look at in the terms of geography where we are, look at it from the above, we are in 40 minutes of driving from Sochi airport and an hour from Sochi railway station. Sochi is historically the main resort of Russia since the Soviet Union, and this city is loved and important by everyone in Russia. It is quite accessible, so you can fly here easily, lots of flights, and in Moscow we have, in the peak season, we have only 20 flights from Moscow, And for the Olympic Games, several resorts and venues were constructed. So it's a very large and important cluster that works all year round and is known abroad as well. If we look at it again, we'll see that Sochi or the Black Sea Caucasus is probably one of the unique places where we have a warm sea and snowy peaks are in less than an hour of driving. So it's a truly unique place. We are in the middle reaches of the Mzimta River. It's the largest river of the area. Its length is 89 kilometers. So you see the Radisson Rosa Hutar Hotel mark in the map. So it's middle and the upper reaches of Mzimta. As for the future and the plans of the Rosa Hutar development, it's been prioritized, and this priority will determine our activities in the long run. What you see here, the cable cars and hotels and everything, this was done for the Winter Olympics, and Sochi was supposed to become an all-season resort. And then we are going to move up the Mzimta Valley within the National Park of Sochi. So probably you saw that in the media, and yesterday we mentioned it a bit. But generally we can describe this project as follows. We are going to create a 40 kilometers loop connecting 6 campings or even glampings that will have 75 to 190 beds each. And one of those campings is going to work all the year round. So building of this infrastructure will help tourists discover the potential of Rosa Hutar. And this resort will be comfortable, convenient, and accessible. And mountainous tourism in the Western Caucasus used to be not so convenient and comfortable, so we are going to change that situation. We are not only going to construct those campings, and of course it's going to be with the green standards accepted at the corporate level and also based on the tradition. And in Krasnaya Polyana, mountain tourism has been developed since early times, and probably the first mountain tourist club in Russia was founded in the end of the 19th century, and its kind of local office was in Krasnaya Polyana, so it was more than 100 years ago. And back then, when this club was established, they highlighted several priorities which we take into account. Apart from promoting tourism in the mountains, our predecessors were prioritizing the studies of the unique nature and preservation of wildlife that inhabits these mountains. So we try to apply this in our practice as well.
And we invest our time and effort into implementing the program of sustainable development of our resort. And this is the topmost priority for us. And I would like to share with you the information and some data that we received from the photo traps that we have. So Western Caucasus, and every specialist knows that this is just one of the hotspots that the in terms of the species that we have, and endemic and rare species here. And so we do not promote or PR the number of the wild animals here, just looking at the traffic that we have here. And every time we ask, do we have bears here? Or the bears are not as big as in Kamchatka, so they are more vegetarian here, and they are more of a kinder than other Siberian let's say species, but nevertheless photo traps, and most of the pictures taken this fall, where these animals pick up what. So this is the pair, and so here we have the deer and the wild boar, and also the bears came September. So it was quite an active food migration, and so these, of course, the invasive species of raccoons here, some foxes, and we also have some of the weasels here, and also we are interested about the animals, and this is what the interest and how animals are interested in these cameras, trail cameras. So this is the Aibga Ridge. So here we have the largest herd of chamois, so Caucasus chamois. So here we have from Krasna Polyana Resort, so they also have, they're quite used to these things, and we have these trap cameras. So we have the Yuri of Kutar, so this is the, we have some trail paths and paths there, and so on hot days our tourists can see these species. And here we're on the territory of the national park, and we are not only here with Rosa Hutor and not only the lifts, not only neighboring resorts, but also the sewage facilities and the power lines and the water treatment facilities in Krasna Polyana that were built towards the Olympic Games. And all this development, of course, that was a huge drama because it was accompanied by there was a quite traumatic period, and of course there have been a lot of arguments about many things. And I just can say one thing, then when the question was asked what kind of measures, mitigating measures are going to take place in terms of the preserving the biodiversity of the Western Caucasus, so there was an idea of the program of the leopard program reintroduction, and Rosa Hutor was one of those places that helped and assisted this program. And it's quite an interesting thing that here we have such a species. You see, there's a chestnut. So quite few, only 50 hectares. 22 are on the territory of the national park. And so you see, this chestnut is not only for people, but of course for animals. And here we have the bears, and of course it helped and assisted people throughout the war, Second World War. And Tarnau said that that's a great place. And at the opening of this conference, the restoration of the box tree. So because there was an invasive bug and that damaged in 2 or 3 years in the Western Caucasus, we lost all of the box trees. But chestnut on the territory of the national park and the national reserve, let's say here we are. So it's just drying down because it's being attacked by a moss, and there was another invader that's called another another bug, and dying out of this chestnut is that the all the trees lose leaves, and it goes in huge amounts. And if you look at the at the park, so you could see some of the examples. And the problem, so at the end of 19th century, and the scientific approach was described at the end of the 1930s. So so we are at the center of, as you can see, there are so many tourists, despite this late autumn, demanded, and it's quite a popular, a rich, if we may say, tourism cluster. On both sides, we have the Directorate of the National Park and Biosphere Reserve. The question with the damage that is imposed on the ecocenosis and biocenosis and the culture of the species is that it's been 100 years, and the problem, we need to change the legislation to provide for the treatment of these species by chemicals, for example. Are we doing enough to preserve it that has an impact? So I'm sorry to say that, and my appeal to all of us who is listening to us, or everybody who hears us, that's a great example for our joint efforts. Should we expect that the leader of the tourism industry, Rosa Hutter, will take on the lead here? Most probably not, but to support the program that unites efforts of special protected territories and some scientific support, and to be viewed as the leading project in this area, of course we are going to support that as well. And how do we offer people to, let's say, have a look at the vicinities, and also to provide some trails, and we allow people to contact the wild animals. So I would like to introduce this video as and on a positive note.
Дмитрий, а вы сколько лет уже с Розой Хуттер? Сколько вы здесь работаете?
4 года уже.
4 года? Вы до этого тоже принимали участие, ну, имели отношение к этой территории?
С 2008 года
Я вас представлял, обозначал, что хотелось бы из всех этих лет работы, может быть, какие-то ошибки, которые
So these are the things that we're doing, and I'm sure that we need to look into the things that we were happy to see, that we're approaching the further programs that you launch and introduce, and we'll be more than happy to learn from you about some new successes. Thank you very much, Dmitry. Thank you. And going forward, I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Hamaza, so Director of Eco-Monitoring. So we've listened to a presentation about Caucasus, Rosa Hutter. So Dmitry here is going to talk about his project that he's been involved in with his colleagues. They were involved in some of the what are your expectations? Dmitry, please, you have the floor. So because the biodiversity, and so this is the main function of our roundtable discussion, I would like to structure my presentation around these priorities is important, and ecotourism, if we combine the activities at ecotourism with especially protected natural territories. So we have of course, all the important things like protection and money and flow, but speaking about all these facets for the ecological biodiversity and preservation of landscapes. So a lot of the more people we have is, of course, the more detrimental effect it's going to have. And when we speak about the protected territories and national parks, we need to mitigate and balance out these two factors. And I would like to take on how we'll be able to do that and our approaches to these programs. And one of the main things, and we need to start with the explanation of the mechanisms of what we see as the key mechanism, so that our put the money where the mouth is. It was raised at the previous roundtable. The fact was that the increased number of tourism flow has the positive effect, or should have a positive effect, on the preservation of the territories. So there should be the positive flow, financial cash flow, that should be channeled back into the these areas, and in order to shape up some extra funds, or so that we'll be able to preserve nature. And at the same time, how these things are being done. So here we have the Krasная Polyana picture here, and here we have the Alania National Park, and these are the developments of territories, and the territory is just as is. So, of course, I would like to, let's say, briefly describe, due to the constraints of time, that stakeholders and participants in the development of all these tourism flows, we have quite a lot of international participants, and none of those have the goal as the main goal in relation to the natural territory, preservation of the territory. So the local communities that want to preserve the history, and tourism businesses that want to bring in more tourists and increase the anthropogenic load, and the local authorities that might have their own goals and achieve those goals, let's say mostly developer goals. So, so that we shape up the areas of development of ecological tourism, we need to have an understanding that the natural environment is the cornerstone and the point of attraction of people, and it should be the focus of attention. And the easy example is that national park cannot agree with the local hotels on paying for the guides, for example. So the guide says he's just walking around with some people and saying something to people. So people went into the territory, built a fire, left some garbage, and this is the national park. Now the problem with the national park, but the hotel collected all the money. But you see, the mutually beneficial cooperation is not there. So. So you see, this type of kind of lack of cooperation is true for the administration. So they came, they saw, they shook hands, and they said, okay, it would be great to build a lift here, and simply because everybody's building lifts, we also need to have a ski resort. Okay, so when we speak about the preservation of the natural territory, this is very important. That should be at the top of the list in order to build the understanding and cooperation with all the participants, and this is the value of the way of life of people. So as the world experience, we can talk about some African experience or French experience. So they write and sign a kind of charter where representatives of local communities and business and authorities, they sign up that we see that what everything is right. So principles of building communists is true. So you need to believe in these things first in order to live by the rules. But of course, political aspects are different, but nevertheless, how to mitigate the conflict between the development of tourism and preservation. And I think that's quite an interesting area that overlap, the traditional use of nature with a lot of historical monuments. It means that in Svanete, where they had the towers built up in the mountains, where they have paganisms, and it's quite an interesting thing, and sacred stones, sacred trees, and bowing to the spirits of your ancestors and worshiping them. So, and of course, I don't want to attack anybody's religious feelings, but we are speaking about the market here. So we feel that the proper zoning, where we have the traditional use of the natural, areas, and we're able to attract a lot of tourists, and of course there is some capacity that the roads have, and so there should be some comfort of stay and some loads that we can calculate. So it helps develop agricultural tourism, cultural tourism, ethnic tourism, and Kinozersk also spoke about it, and also the rare species of the Red Book. So we looked at the network of routes and paths, and some some weeds that can be tramped down, and so we also looked at the network of paths, and considering the paths of migration. So up to 17,000 people in the restricted area. So that was our calculation, and so that was the number that we arrived at as the limit. And can 17,000 visitors, let's say, feed this territory and provide enough finance? Most probably not. And when we get involved in that, and so these are the top numbers that, as we can see, this is the potential of the region. So, and Shagdad, that's another region, and the zoning was in the national park. It was not finalized, and so that was the area for agricultural tourism, and so we also have some of the developments at this resort, and we might have some additional things for the development of this territory. So from the standpoint of building the system and structure that is related to the preservation of landscape, we can see that, and yesterday we spoke about it with some of our colleagues. So that was the control, access control to these territories. The simpler paperwork is better, in our view, and therefore we see that we need to calculate this tourism flow, and we need to manage these routes and navigation and by these people. So in order to avoid the tramping of these routes, so we need to somehow adapt our methods to that. So I understand that we're, let's say, should look into that, and again, probably such a characteristics as the quality and preservation of those species at this area. So, and for example, if we say that this territory can house 1,000 bisons, then over a certain period of time, the quality for these species are good. So if we don't have any decline in the number of the key species, and so this is the kind of monitoring. This is the work for the scientific research groups, and lastly, let's say half a minute about some examples. And so we support the concept that was expressed here as the tourism cluster. So on the northern Alania territory, 3-4 resorts could compete and fight for, let's say, the same people. So probably these 4 places would not compete, but would be promoted as the one, let's say, area to get to, and some good examples from Scotland. So you go to any parking, so you just can walk. So you just walk particular paths and to see the local attractions, and so that could be for free. Why is it free? I was thinking hard about it, and then the idea is that tourists are going to stay in the local hotel and eat in the pub, and they pay the license to the municipality, and local regional municipality doesn't lose this money, so they bring some of it back, and they pay wages, and the local municipality can spend this sum of money to develop their own territory. So this is the ideology of what is the positive examples of that I started my talk with. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll get back to this presentation sometime later. So this is not so much about the so this is more of a don't harm. Yes, so that was the main message. Not so much to preserve, but try not to harm. So friends, we in terms of the speakers, we have let's say a surprise speaker and a bonus speaker here. And before I introduce another speaker, I would like to remind you that we have the voting and the question that was put up on the online. And our next speaker is Elena Lidovskih, and the president of the fund of Berceu Zala. So since 1990s, she's been organizing the visits of both around across the country and outbound tourism, and she's an expert in the Far East, Kamchatka, Altai, Krasnoyarsk region, and many other areas. So she's an author of the guidebook Tourism and further development, and she has a wealth of examples. So Lena, you have the floor.
Hello, dear colleagues. I hope you can see my presentation. As for the concept for environmental tourism, this kind of tourism so it's a serious tool for biodiversity and preservation. So I would like to give you a couple of examples. So tourism brings revenues about more than 4 million, and Galapagos Islands was the same. So they were earning more than 600,000 from tourism. So economic efficiency of national parks of Africa is 18 times higher if they are a tourist destination compared to their development for hunting tourism or agriculture. It's important to remember that environmental tourism involves local population and creates economic alternatives for them. I would like to give an example from Chukotka, where there was a very interesting case of interacting between tourists and the local population. There are no hotels there, no accommodation, and people usually stay with the local people. Some of them provide accommodation, some provide food, some provide transportation and excursions. Some of them are tourist guides. Also, we have people who keep deers participating in these programs, and the local population have quotas for hunting and fishing as their traditional lifestyle, but locals prefer to work with the tourists instead of hunting, so tourism is a very important alternative for them. So, but not always. Environmental tourism is so positive. To get to this effect, you need to do a lot of work. I would like to give the example of volunteers working in a reserve, and previously they had a camping there, and previously they had a lot of deers before, and these herds left the place, and the snowy leopard left this place as well. But we have lots of examples like that when environmental tourism had hazard and posed threats to the biodiversity. And even in the United States, not everything was so sunshiny. They also had a period when a certain destination became a boom and lots of tourists, and the territory was degrading, and it stopped being interested for the tourists, so they started visiting other places and so on. Environmental tourism can cause a lot of hazards. Even such light versions of tourism, like bird watching or watching of other animals and photographing, can pose a threat to the vulnerable species and their reproduction. So that's why development of environmental tourism provides for an integrated approach and very serious work related to implementing the monitoring mechanisms and control and management mechanisms. So strictly speaking, from the standpoint of environmental tourism on the international scale, tours on involving cars of different types, all four-wheel drive cars. This cannot be environmental tourism. Hunting, of course, is not environmental tourism. Even fishing, even if they let the fishes go after they catch it, it's still not environmental tourism. So how can we preserve the biodiversity and reduce the negative impact? So it's a very complicated tourist industry, and it's not only about developing the trails. Environmental tourism implies a lot of work. So it's a chain, and in this chain, every link is important, and we need to restructure the target audiences and change the range of categories. So we need to prioritize the target groups we want to see in our areas. So we need to interact with the professional tourist companies. We need to take the opinions of the local population into account, and the advantages of environmental tourism and the revenues from it should be redistributed among the local population as well. It should not be concentrated with several participants. And finally, I would like to say that if tourism generates some negative impact, this does not mean, this cannot be considered environmental tourism. A real ecotourism is an efficient tool for nature preservation and biodiversity preservation. Thank you. Thank you, Yelena. So your last phrase, that environmental tourism is an efficient tool in preserving biodiversity. So should it increase the biodiversity or just preserve it? Ideally, it should improve the situation. And an example, if at the previous stage of tourism development, we lost some vulnerable species, now the biodiversity is increasing. Certain species are being returned and the number of animals increases. And there are lots of examples like that, especially abroad. But it does not happen automatically. So environmental tourism doesn't give you all those benefits at once. So to get all these benefits, you really have to do a lot of work. Now we're going to have a session of questions and answers, comments, inputs. So those who are watching us online, please send in your questions. And we'll start with a question to Dmitry Kolosov. Just a series of questions even. So the first one is, how could you comment on behalf of Rosa Hutor regarding the road to Kardevach? So Kardevach is a lake in the reserve here in Sochi, and the road, it goes through the national park. Yeah, that's a famous topic. So Rosa Hutor is constructing the road to Kardevach, and Kardevach is located on the border of the Sochi Reserve and the Caucasus Natural Biosphere Reserve in the very top corner, and the Mzimta River starts from this lake. Development of the infrastructure of Rosa Hutor, that we know for sure, and all of that is within the recreational area of the Sochi National Park, so we can be completely sure of that and discuss it and show it. And the myth that we construct, this dreadful myth that we are going to construct a road to Kardevach and thus ruin this beautiful place, it's very much publicized, but I cannot confirm it. So, nor now, neither in the nearest future, you're not planning to construct anything to Kardevach, right? We don't plan to construct this road. A question to Piotr, but I have also a question to Dmitry before that. In many presentations, we saw that one of the important or mandatory requirements to environmental tourism is the support from the local population. How does Rosa Hutor help the local population? Do you have many local employees? Firstly, and secondly, what benefits does the national park receive from your resort? Thank you. So I'm kind of participant of the show, What Was Next? But I would like to say, in this discussion I heard a certain weak spots, and is an ideal image of environmental tourism, and we appeal to it, saying this is the ecotourism, this is not ecotourism. These ideal images, they are good when they are driving changes, when they serve as guiding lights, but they should not turn into ivory towers. In this case, they will stop driving interest, progress, and so on. So as soon as we are here together discussing the issues of sustainable development of the level of our industry, I don't want us to be carried away with philosophical questions of what environmental tourism is and what it is not. Well, it could be a good discussion, but it distracts us from the practical and tangible issues. So as for Rosa Hutar, is quite a big employer. In the peak season, we employ about 3,000 people. Could you make it brief, please? Yeah. And many of these employees, they come from other regions. But if you look at the Krasnaya Polyana community, it is rather small. So it's 40 kilometers from Sochi. It is a very small community. So it is quite interesting. So everyone in Krasnaya Polyana has some connection with Rosa Hutar. As for the National Park and Reserve, so today you have to pay for the entrance to the National Park and Reserve, and every visitor that gets to these grounds has to pay. So Rosa Hutar pays the National Park and the Reserve, and I hope they use this money to implement nature preservation programs. But I would like to emphasize once again that we should really shape our mutual agenda.
Yes, I'd like to say that I read the report on sustainable report that you disseminated, and we read a lot of good words and true words and a mission and streams of activities. And I guess that if we add some maps and numbers, I think that it's going to be even better. So we can do these things together. Thank you for your response and answers. And now the question is up on the screen. Piotr, are you online? Asleep. So the question reads like this. How have you worked with the travel operators so that they would bring tourists, and how much time did it take for the buyers to get used to people? Speaking tour operators, so this work is not so much of the reserve, so this is the work of those gems, so to speak, that we have here, and every tourist or tour operator, they sense the value and importance of preservation of what they see, and these things are unique, and we always focus on the nature preservational aspect of things, everything what we do, and tourism companies, they see that there is some shortage of funds, and probably there's not improper positioning. And why do I believe in this type of tourism, ecotourism? It's simply because there are some bright examples how companies can make money, and not only local population but business in general, and positioning and visiting this Kronorsky reserve. So it's done by let's say these companies, and the money goes towards preservation and conservation. So I'm sure the business is going to be sustainable if there is like a return on this type of investment. So there is like, of course, there should be something special, and of course with rigid norms. And you should walk the fine line, otherwise there will be consequences, and we need to understand that that this should be, you know, if we deviate from those strict, rigid, fine guidelines, so we're going to violate some of the things. Then we miss. So okay, but about the bears. Oh no, nobody's kind of the bears. I don't know. It's not domesticating. Have they gotten used to people? No, but it just happens that the bears are linked to the what they eat. Let's say if they have a lot of fish, then bears have a lot of time to play around, and so everybody likes it, when you get there. So, and the bears are nice. And when there is not enough food, then it is a wild animal that that may attack tourists if they, let's say, misbehave. And so there's a very fine line of these things, and of course, it should not be. The thing that we cannot agree with the wildlife or with bears, and we need to somehow observe and see what we do. So there are some areas where there are some bears that go in solitude, and the bears will never see people in some spots of our reserve. And of course this is a problem, how to manage the flows, and I'm sure that we're going to deal with this problem, and of course the structure of business that we have in operation here. Yes, do we have questions to the speakers in the room here? And Mikhail, question to you. During the presentation, so you said that it was more of a theoretical one. Do you have some suggestions or some hands-on experience, practical examples? So of course I can support any line of my presentation with some of the examples, and due to the constraints of time, so I'd like to say that we've been working more on the practical preservation and environmental projects, and I want to tackle these particular issues. And if there is a particular question or I have some comments, yes, please do. And probably you noted throughout the presentations, so Dmitry asked at the beginning, so still we need to figure out the models, and we assess the efficiency of tourism by the, let's say, financial aspects of things, and those people who plan. So here the efficiency and demand, some other economic activities. So I would like to note that it's not only the additional funds that we attract, but the tourism at the special sites, and those 8 points of tourism that I mentioned. Yes, we can make a little bit of money, but still tourism can provide a much better natural preservation effect, and that would be my first comment. And second comment is that to support Dmitry a little bit, because in his presentation you see the colleagues, you need to know that we're trying to somehow contradict or put let's say, tourism against preservation, because but I don't want to dwell too much on it, but I would like to say that there is no problem in any type of tourism that it takes place in certain zones, and we are the customers, and we eat the food that grows, and let's say when we want to relax, and of course we understand that the business supports the kind of models that and they want to make some money, and of course it's not a problem in that, but of course I would like to say that we should view business and the approaches to business and to environmental tourism from the standpoint of some natural preservations, and we need to have these effects. And again, this is just very important. And again, these were my comments. Yes, thank you, Mikhail. So Dmitry. So we need to give the floor to another Dmitry. So I noted that you nodded in agreement, and so you are at the top of this route. And what kind of bottlenecks do you see? What challenges do you think we're going to face? So I do think that I was nodding in agreement, and what I wanted, and my message was that this story of development of business and tourism. So business does develop tourism, and a person, especially a person who lives in an urban environment, so he or she needs this and feels this need to commune with nature. So we need to satisfy these desires, and here we have the niches to develop these territories. And of course we would like to get some new emotions and new impressions, and in other words, to fill in this gap that we have when we live in Moscow or in any other big city. So in a true sense, so these things are important, but it should not be a purely capitalistic model. But we need to build the community, and taken Rosa Hutor as an example. Here we have the one big investor into the development of the resort, and we can look at these models of Kinozersk Biosphere Reserve and the National Park, where we have the development of cooperation with mutual support, and this was the micro investment fund supporting the business. Again, that was an interesting program to support local people, and the bottlenecks and in terms of the models that are going to be stipulated by who develops business. And so of course here is the preservation of territories, and this is an area that is restricted to the let's say territories, and here we have this experience from this conference and the takeouts from this conference. Of course, people with some bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they're ready to dive into these things. And of course, we're not discussing this program with Piotr, and he doesn't want to to explain how to push the poachers out. So I think that he was threatened, and not only he was threatened by it, his members and I mean personnel and people. And mostly this is the, people have to be passionate in order to go ahead with these projects. And I don't know if it answers your question. So, colleagues, I think that the time is up for our conference, and so we had the voting, and I would like to put up on the screen the results of this voting. So you see, I cannot say that it was a split vote. Everybody thinks that the tourism at these restricted areas should have the effect of natural preservation, and I think that they should view it as a way to save nature and to do what we can to preserve nature. And I thank all the panelists and everybody who's been with us online and in this room. Thank you very much. Join other events of this conference. Thank you.
Какой шум? 15, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
А я думал, это камни.